question that we posed was whether or not the persecution which was taking place inside Myanmar, specifically in Rakhine State, was genocidal in nature. So that was our question. And Thomas and another researcher, Alicia Delacour-Venning, and I proceeded to work on this project. We began it in August last year. Tom and Alicia spent around 4 months in Burma, and I spent about 2.5, 3 weeks in Rakhine State, gathering data. We've interviewed over 150 people in the course of this research. And so I think today what we want to do is to talk about why we argue that it is a genocide, why it's not simply, and I say simply in inverted commas, a crime against humanity. This, from our perspective, is a genocide, and we want now to talk about the evidence that we've gathered to make that specific argument. We're based at, as Michael said, at the International State Crime Initiative at Queen Mary University of London now. And we work within a framework which is less legal and much more criminological. So for us, state crimes are human rights violations perpetrated by state agents in pursuit of state organisational goals. So that's effectively our definition for state crime. Genocide is a form of state crime. And most importantly, we want to get across this evening that genocide is a process. Genocide is not simply the annihilation of a particular ethnic or political group. It's a process, and it begins many, many years before annihilation can take place. So if we understand genocide as a process, then we are in the midst of a genocide in Myanmar. So I think we'll now move to... So this is the convention. This is the definition. The formal international legal definition of genocide. And there are a number of problems with this definition. Much of it relates to the whole question of demonstrating intent. For us, there are a number of issues, which I haven't much time to go into now, but we can see that many of the elements of this definition are met anyway inside Myanmar today. But what it doesn't capture is the process nature of genocide. And so we tend to reject this definition and we employ the process definition so that we can capture exactly what's been going on over the last number of years inside Myanmar. The other problem with this definition, that it imposes particular obligations on states who have signed up to the convention. And those obligations mean that if it is recognised as a genocide by an international court, then the international community has to do something about it. So that's why we have a generalised reluctance on the part of the international community to label what is going on anywhere in the world, Sudan or Myanmar, as a genocide.
So, as Professor Green said, we take a more social science criminological point of view. So what we do is, or what we do with all our projects, is we collect data and we apply the theory to it. The theory we use for genocide is written by Feuerstein, an Argentinian academic, and I would implore you to read his book if you do get the chance. But what he has done is he's looked at different genocides, and looked at all the academic research, and has put together these stages of genocide, this periodization. And it starts off with, and we'll go through the stages with you, it starts off with stigmatization, then we have harassment, and that is when it goes from a kind of a psychological harassment to a physical harassment, so the violence becomes physical. The next stage is isolation. You try and isolate the group that is being targeted, and then we have systematic weakening. You weaken the group politically, physically, psychologically, however you can, and then you get to stage 5, which is annihilation, when the mass killing starts. And then afterwards we have symbolic enactment, which we don't need to get involved in now, but it's about the way we remember genocides and about the way that society has been changed since they have happened. Our research, these stages don't very clearly go from one to another. There's a lot of overlap between the stages, and you'll probably notice that yourself as we go through them. And sometimes stages, if they're not completed, they will revert back to the more previous stage and start again. From our data collection, we say that it's well into stage 4 now, systematic weakening, and that's what's so worrying about what we saw out in Burma. That doesn't mean stage 5 has to follow, but we know from the past that stage 5 cannot follow without stage 1 to 4 already being met. So it's quite a worrying situation. Sorry, that's the stages, and I think it's systematic weakening. So the first one is stigmatization. This is when you need to other the group. You need to identify a group and other them in a negative way. So they have to be put outside your world of obligation in some way. And that's done by stigmatization. So the government in Burma call Rohingya illegal Bengalis. So that's kind of a legal stigmatization. They don't belong in this country, they are illegal, they don't deserve any rights, and they're Bengali. They're from either Bangladesh or the state of Bengal in India. We're not really sure what the government mean actually by Bengali. And the Rohingya did have white cards, which were temporary citizenship cards, but they have been confiscated over the last few months, mainly because of a campaign in Rakhine State, and you will have seen this white card sign on pretty much every shop in Sitwe while we were there. There was also the long-standing 969 campaign, which is a kind of don't use Muslim shops campaign that we had in Burma. And a word that was used with us a lot, even by officials, the Security Minister called and the Attorney General called Rohingya Kalar. And some Rohingya told us that that's akin to being called a nigger inside Burma. So to have officials using that word. And these are the kinds of words that are used. Fierstein says that violence at this stage is verbal and symbolic. Those in power still tolerate the stigmatized group, but draw attention to it and problematize it. So we're told that there's links to jihadists, that Al-Qaeda, Saudi Arabia, someone even told me Italy, but they're not, I don't know where. I think they were just listing countries beginning with I. So we had Iran, Iraq, and then I got Italy. But it was, so that just shows that there's not much knowledge about it. We just know that they're somehow linked to jihadists. Someone else said to me, we know that they're linked to jihadists because if you turn on BBC News, they will tell you that all Islam is to do with jihadists. That night I did turn on BBC and the big words Islamic State were written on the screen, so I could kind of see where they were coming from, in that they were just taking this view without having any kind of burrowing into it to see what that means. We are told that there was a high birth rate in the Muslim population, that they have multiple wives. The data doesn't show that any of this is true. This is just the rumours that those been spread to stigmatize. The Islamic treatment of women, the threat to Buddhism, and the business monopolizes. Something we saw with the Jews in Germany as well. So these are the kinds of things that are going around to help stigmatize. And they're not just rumours on the streets. These are coming from newspapers, coming from government departments, coming from the monks, coming from politicians. And so once you have othered this group, you can move to the next stage, which is harassment. And it's characterized by bullying and disenfranchisement. It steepens the stigmatization process. If you start bullying a group, they become victims, and you're able to, again, fence them off as a group. It tests people's readiness to get engaged in violence. There was an outbreak of violence in June 2012, and again in October 2012. And it was seen as a kind of a spontaneous act of violence. It wasn't. Our research shows that it was highly organized, that transport and food was provided for all the people coming down to Sitwe to get involved in the violence. And it's also a test. Can we get away with this violence? If we do, run riot or rampage, burn down villages, kill people, are we going to be arrested afterwards? And if not, that we know we're on the right course, that we're doing the right thing. There was 200 people killed in that violence, there's been no prosecutions. This is just a picture we have of one of the mosques that was burnt down. 38 mosques were burnt down during the violence in Sittwe itself. Beautiful buildings before, still, kind of strikingly, saddeningly beautiful, but they have been completely destroyed and are no longer in use. The violence also led to a justification for increasing security. So this helps you go to the next stage of isolation. We are putting people in camps and in ghettos for their own protection. The same story in Germany, Nazi Germany. People were voluntarily going to camps because they felt it was for their own protection, until after a while they realized they were being detained there, and that wasn't what it was about. The chief minister was removed from the state, and the union government put in their own one, and security minister. This is all under the excuse of increased security, again, as a direct result from this organised violence that we saw. And also this removal of rights is a kind of harassment, taking away people's right to vote, making sure that there was no way for people to organise politically and to have their political aspirations met. I talked about the impunity. Stanton says if the murderers get away with their crimes, it's a green light to finish the genocide. As I said, it was 200 murders. We asked the Rakhine Attorney General in an interview, and he said to us that it happened at night, and that's why there's no prosecutions. So any crimes that happen at night, you can't see what's going on, so it's very difficult to have witnesses and things like that, which seems quite bizarre and doesn't stand the test of reason, unfortunately. In 2013, there was actually an attack on the UN Special Rapporteur Quintana, and he went to the state authorities and said, my convoy was attacked, you didn't do anything to protect me, why not? And they said, no, you misunderstood you, they weren't attacking you, they were trying to give you a t-shirt. So there's this kind of getting away with doing whatever they want, and this is state officials. Then we have the monks that are feeding into it. There is this kind of power play going on. There's a worry that Buddhism, as Burma enters the modern world, Buddhism will go the way that Christianity went in the UK, and this kind of rhetoric. So we have what at the time calls the face of Buddhist terror, Varathu, and he's allowed go. He has a huge monastery in Mandalay, and he's allowed go on TV, and he's quoted in newspapers, and it's just blatant hate speech, and there's absolutely no stop on him by the government. He's allowed to say whatever he wants, and some of the things he says are designed to create fear in the Rakhine Buddhist population so that they will turn against the Muslim population. So then we reach stage 3 and we have our isolation, the camps and in the ghetto. There's one ghetto in Sittwe called Mingala. There are 110,000 people inside camps around Sittwe, and less numbers of camps in other parts of the state, but there's 1.1 million Rohingya and they cannot leave their villages. They can't go anywhere without travel authorization, which is usually not forthcoming from the authorities. So they are completely isolated. We are not allowed to go in to study them. Journalists are not allowed to talk to them, especially on Mingala. I think we're probably the only academics that have been in there. We couldn't get to Northern Rakhine State. We couldn't get outside of Sittwe. The security minister was afraid that we would talk to Kalar, is what he told us. So he wouldn't let us leave Sittwe. So it's a complete informational black hole when it comes to Western academics or journalists going in. So we rely on information coming out and networks of information. But we couldn't go there to study. We were specifically told that that was out of the question. So there's a serious lack of transparency. They're trying to hide something in Northern Rakhine State. This is just a sign when you come to Mingala, register here please, international organisations and foreigners. They're the problem. International organisations and foreigners are the problem. They're the ones that might get the information out about the conditions, about what's happening here. So that's why they need to register. Anybody else can wander in and And then we move to systematic weakening, which is the stage we believe it is at now. Do you want to talk about it?
Sure. And as Tom mentioned, sorry, I'll turn this off. As Tom mentioned, this is the stage that we find the Rohingya currently in. And so not only have they been stigmatized, completely othered as not worthy of the moral universal obligation for the Buddhist majority, they've been isolated following the violence in 2012. They were isolated into, as Tom said, the ghetto in Onwingala, but also into what we call a camp complex, and the rest of northern Rakhine State, from which they cannot leave. They're trapped in these villages, they are trapped in the ghetto in Onwingala. They have no means to leave those villages, those ghettos, that camp complex. So they are utterly isolated from the rest of society. And once you have been isolated by the state then implements a series of measures designed to reduce people to what Agamben calls a bare life. Basically, to take away every element of their purposeful life, to dehumanize them in the most significant way. And so at the moment, the Rohingya are being subject to both psychological and physical destruction. They've been stripped of human agency. You go into the camps, you go into the ghetto, and as Tom said, we weren't able to go to northern Rakhine State, but we hear that the conditions in northern Rakhine State are even more deplorable, more appalling than they are south of the state. And so you enter the camp complex, you enter the camps and the ghetto, and what you're faced with are people who have lost all purposeful energy, if you like. They wander around. What you see when you talk to people are people with dead eyes. They are deeply depressed. There's an air of depression that covers all of these communities. It's very hard to exercise agency, and at the same time there's a consequent loss of human dignity. They live in appalling conditions, massively overcrowded, open sewers, 10 families in a camp will share one toilet. They are wholly reliant on World Food Programme aid, which is never adequate, which doesn't contain any fresh fruit or vegetables, and which, from our experience, was increasingly always late. One of the things that is apparent is the degree of illness in the camps and in the ghetto. I mean, and people are dying of absolutely treatable diseases like diarrhea. The government effectively removed all emergency health care for the Rohingya. They expelled the only organisation which was providing emergency health care, the Médecins Sans Frontières. They expelled Médecins Sans Frontières in February 2014. And as the slide says, they were the biggest provider of healthcare in the camps and the ghettos, and the ghetto. A little bit later in 2014, the international humanitarian infrastructure was destroyed by Rakhine Buddhist mobs, who are led, encouraged by the government to fear the international community for the reasons that Tom talked about. There was also the establishment of the Emergency Coordination Centre, which sounds innocuous in itself, but this is effectively an organisation populated by the far right, who, in effect, monitor the international community. And so one of the consequences of this is that there's been a very significant chilling effect on the international community inside Rakhine State and in Burma generally, unwilling to raise their head above the parapet, to talk about what's actually happening inside Rakhine State to the Rohingya, for fear that they too will be expelled, for fear that they will be attacked by Rakhine mobs. So they stay in order to preserve the presence of their organisations inside Myanmar. And here's a quote from one of the more rabid members of the Emergency Coordination Centre that we interviewed. The UN and INGOs are only helping the Muslim community. They're helping Muslims to take over land in Rakhine State. The Muslim population is increasing and the UN is helping them to survive. Because of the support of INGOs to Bengalis, many Rakhine are losing their land and also suffering. This is putting pressure on the land as there is not enough space. It also needs to be said that the Rakhine population are themselves an ethnic minority, a recognised ethnic minority inside Burma, Myanmar. And they have particular grievances. Rakhine State is at least the second poorest state in the Union, if not the poorest. And so there are economic grievances, and these economic grievances are played upon to create deeper ideological fears and anxieties, which are then directed against the Muslim community. And so the consequence of systematic weakening is that the Rohingya are living in what we would describe as broken communities. Social cohesion doesn't exist. They experience on a regular basis humiliation, abuse, harassment. We did identify corrupt practices within the camp complex amongst the Rohingya community. This is perfectly natural. This is what we would expect. It also occurred in the ghettos in Poland during the Nazi occupation. We have an image here of the comparative camp conditions, because after the violence of 2012, a number of Rakhine Buddhists were also driven from their homes because their homes were burnt down in the violence that ensued. A far smaller proportion, a tiny proportion by comparison. But here we have one of the Rakhine Buddhist camps, and you'll see that the houses are built on stilts, so there's room underneath the houses, air flowing, all the cooking is done underneath the house. Each of these homes has its own bathroom, its own toilet for one family, very spacious. A number of the people, Rakhine people that we interviewed in this particular camp in Sittwe, said that the houses that they now lived in were far better than the houses that they had fled from that had burnt down. This is, by contrast, a Rohingya camp. This is one of the an unregistered section of an IDP camp, but you have in this image you have the long houses, so 10 families in very, very overcrowded conditions, share a toilet quite some way away from the buildings, from the houses. So it's very, very difficult conditions. Open sewers, as I mentioned earlier. A quality of life, we can't really be described as a quality of life. And here we have two quotes from an Arakan National Party spokesperson. This is the leading political party of Rakhine State. And again, when the international community give them, they won't say the word Rohingya, but when they give them a lot of food donations, they grow fat and become stronger. They will become more violent. So you can see the kind of anxieties and fears that the government is fostering, encouraging and playing upon. And we interviewed, the three of us interviewed the Arakan National Party spokesperson in January. And he said, according to the 1982 law, that's the citizenship law, the people that don't have citizenship should be kept in the prison. But in reality, there are so many people, so the government can't keep the people in prisons. So as an idea, they should have concentration camps to keep these people who don't have citizenship. Oh, whoops, he said, sorry, not concentration camp, detention centre. And he smiled at us. And one of the things that we also observed was the prevalence of Nazi ideology. and that they are quite prepared to quote the Nazis in justifying the current treatment of the Rohingya and the potential treatment which might be meted out in the future. And so this is from one of the published documents of the Rakhine Nationalities and Development Party, which preceded the Arakan National Party. In order for a country's survival, the survival of a race, or in defence of national sovereignty, crimes against humanity may justifiably be committed, as Hitler and the Holocaust. In our Myanmar case, our endeavours to protect our Rakhine race and defend the sovereignty and longevity of the Union of Myanmar cannot be labelled as crimes against humanity or inhuman or inhumane. We no longer wish to hold permanent concerns about the Bengali in our midst. We just want to get it over and done with once and for all. So, I mean, that's extremely sinister. This is an image that you are probably now all familiar with. These were the images that we were confronted with over the past 6 weeks of the Rohingya asylum seekers in the Andaman Sea. The media presented this as a humanitarian crisis. Our argument is, it's not a humanitarian crisis, it's a genocide. Because if you focus on the humanitarian crisis element, this is where your attention will turn. You will try to provide humanitarian aid for this group of people without turning your gaze to Rakhine State, to the Myanmar Union government. And this is why we have to, whilst it was a gift, if you like, for those of us campaigning on behalf of the Rohingya or with the Rohingya, this was indeed a gift because it elevated the condition of what was happening to the Rohingya to the global stage. It's up to us to redirect people's attention away from the boat crisis to the crisis of genocide, which is taking place against the Rohingya, which is driving people out in their hundreds of thousands to risk death at sea. And so the Rohingya really are faced with only two options at the moment: to stay in Myanmar and face annihilation, or to take these perilous journeys through the Bay of Bengal into the Andaman Sea and risk death there. As you know, the Andaman Sea crisis was elicited by the discovery of mass graves in Thailand and then in Malaysia. I'm being told to wind up, so I will very quickly run through this. But that moment forced the traffickers to flee and left the boats stranded in the sea. This has happened before, but this time the international media picked it up. And so, in fact, I think that's where we'll leave it. I'm sorry for taking it too long.
Okay. Thank you very much.